Okay, I think we're gonna get started here. So, uh, first off, thank you everyone for coming and joining us this evening. My name is Ruping Law. I'm one of the conservation specialists at AWA, and I have the pleasure tonight of introducing our speaker. Just before we start, I'd like to acknowledge that I am speaking to you from Treaty 7 lands, which are the traditional territories of the Blackfoot nations of the Kainai, Siksika, and Piikani, the Stoney Nakoda nations of the Chiniki, Bearspaw, and Goodstoney, and the Tsuut'ina. And Calgary is also home to the Nose Hill Métis District 5 and the Elbow Métis District 6. I'd just like to take a moment to invite everyone to reflect on the lands and the traditional territories that they're signing in from, and on the history and stewardship of these lands. So a quick note that we are recording this presentation and it's going to be posted on our YouTube channel after. Tonight our speaker is Kallum McDonald, and he'll be talking a little bit about invasive species. So Kallum is a botanist and aquatics biologist based in Edmonton. They have a master's in plant biology from the University of Alberta, and they've worked in crop science, weed management and pesticide science education, and vascular plant taxonomy from the private, non-private, and government sectors. Kallum can usually be found hiking mountains, slogging through wetlands, searching for rare plants, and helping to identify organisms on iNaturalist. In fact, I know Kallum from his work with us during our BioBlitz last year, where he also gave a really impressive presentation on invasive species, and we were so impressed that we decided to ask him to come back and present to everyone here. So I'm really looking forward to what you have to say tonight, Kallum.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Ruping, and thank you to the AWA for having me. I appreciate it. And I'm excited for everyone to join us tonight to talk a little bit about invasive species that threaten the ecological integrity and economy in Alberta. So we're going to be talking today about aquatic invasive species, which is primarily what's shown on this slide. So that's a little sampler platter of some of the species we'll be talking about. I focused the talk on aquatic invasive plants and some of the threats already in Alberta and some that are near but not yet in Alberta. And then I transition at the end of the PowerPoint to talking about some of the new and emerging threats to our grasslands. So there's a new prohibited weed discovery last summer in southern Alberta that I'll discuss, along with some species showing up in Montana and neighboring jurisdictions that we're getting nervous about. So we'll have some dip our toes into the wet and wild world of aquatic invasives, and we'll also crawl our way up the bentonite slopes of terrestrial invasives. So lots to talk about tonight. So I have something going on with my mouse here, but I hope I can move slides just fine. Good. So yeah, let's dive in. My name's Kallum. Thank you all for being here. I come from a farm background, so I've been pulling weeds out of my garden and out of the fields since I could walk, and that's kind of where I cut my teeth in the plant world. So yeah, I've always been kind of involved in weeds. I ultimately received a master's degree in plant biology from the University of Alberta, where I was the TA for the weeds course. I've also worked in invasive species with municipal, provincial, and nonprofit organizations over the past 3 years, and I am a certified pesticide applicator. We won't be talking much about pesticides today, but I'm happy to have off-the-side conversations, or if you have any questions on that topic, I'm happy to discuss that at another time. Oh, there we go. So the ecological impacts of aquatic invasive species. So what makes a species particularly invasive? That's a question I often get. People don't understand necessarily why some species, say in their garden, just stay in their place and they don't spread into our natural areas or into disturbed soil or agricultural lands, while other species can do so at an alarming rate. And so there is this general concept in invasive species ecology, wherein when a species that did not evolve in a given area is brought to a new area in isolation, that species often does not have the same predators, pests, and diseases that would normally keep its populations in check in its native habitat. And so because the absence of predators, pests, diseases, that imparts a competitive advantage onto that species that allows it to outcompete other species. That's the foundational premise for invasive species ecology. Interestingly, though, some species even behave just straightforwardly behave differently than they do in their native range. For example, some weeds in their native range produce fewer seeds than they do in their invasive range, in their introduced range. So there's a couple examples of species, like of plant species that will just produce more seeds when introduced to North America versus their native range in Europe, for example. So there's some phenomenal biology going on, and invasive species intertwine into native ecosystem dynamics in really interesting and complicated ways. And so, again, predators, pests, diseases typically impart that competitive advantage onto the invasive species, allowing them to outcompete and, in often many cases, form large monocultures. And another fundamental premise of ecology is generally when you have monocultures of something, you don't have a lot of space for biodiversity, especially with plant life, plants being so fundamental to ecosystems, right? They're the ones absorbing energy from the sun and converting that into sugars that then insects and animals and everything else can use as food and habitat. So when you have a monoculture of plants, that often reduces the number of habitat niches and required food sources to let other types of biodiversity thrive. And unfortunately, when invasive species take root and become a large infestation, that often is the most impactful on our rare, our at-risk, and our sensitive species. So species that tend to have a very specific and particular set of conditions in a given ecosystem are then displaced by the large population dynamic change when an invasive species forms a large infestation. And just in the case of aquatic invasive plants, so this is true, I guess, with all aquatic vegetation, is that when the vegetation dies off, which periodically happens, they're still living organisms. They have some years where there's a lot of vegetation and some years where there's little. And so in years where there's a large amount of vegetation and then a die off occurs, that vegetation in aquatic ecosystems decomposes. And of course, decomposition of such biomass results in depletion of dissolved oxygen. And so that dissolved oxygen is, of course, very important for aquatic animals. And the most notable outcome of that typically being a die-off of fish. So that's often something you'll see when an algal bloom occurs. You might have a lot of aquatic plants dying off as well. And that really depletes the dissolved oxygen in those systems, often leading to fish die-offs. And that, of course, has economic impacts as well. I know Alberta is not typically thought of as a major fishery, commercial fishery, but plenty of recreational and subsistence fishing does occur in Alberta, of course. That has negative implications, of course, for treaty rights to fishing as well. And so if you have aquatic invasive plants forming large amounts of biomass, larger than typical, and they are dying off in large volumes, that can exacerbate the dissolved oxygen issue and harm fish populations in the long run. So I just give this as an example. So often it's the case with invasive species where they often impact through cumulative effects. So I'm sure folks are aware, we have climate change, we have pollution, we have human disturbance and destruction and draining of wetlands, for example. So there's lots of factors already impacting the health and well-being of our aquatic ecosystems and wetlands. And so when you have invasive species come along, we'll say you have pale yellow iris. It may not take over literally everything. It might not become a single species monoculture, but it's pushing native species out of the way. It's shoving them out of the way. It's taking up that space and those resources that otherwise would be occupied by native plants. And then purple loosestrife comes along and it does the same thing, kind of elbows some cattails out of the way and it smothers the Canada mint and it pushes out the prairie woundwort. And then you have Phragmites come along and that just bulldozes, 1, 2, 300 meters of shoreline. And so it's these cumulative effects of all these climate, anthropogenic, and invasive species impacts can really add up together to fragment an ecosystem, reduce its biodiversity, and reduce its resilience in the face of climate-driven impacts. So that's what we're going to be looking at for the rest of the PowerPoint. And I'll touch on the economic impacts as well. So one of the key issues with aquatic invasive plants, like this curly leaf pondweed shown here, is their ability to clog water intakes and pumps. That is not necessarily a unique challenge posed by invasive aquatic plants. There's plenty of native aquatic plants that pose the same threat. But again, the issue is when aquatic invasive plants typically lack the pests, predators, and diseases that would normally keep them in check. So their populations can often grow to uncontrolled levels, and they can often form a lot more biomass than is typically the case for native aquatic vegetation. So that can be a real frustration, and that can range all the way from irrigation canals, where you have large amounts of water trying to flow through. If you have a big vegetation die-off, lots of that vegetation can accumulate and block the flow through their canals. But you can also say just have farmers with a little pump used to provide water to livestock from a local river. Well, those pumps can clog up with aquatic vegetation, and so that requires time and money and efforts to manage those clogs so that water can flow freely. Of course, I don't know if anyone is eager, but do we have any volunteers for anyone who wants to jump into this little puddle right here? I don't imagine so. I don't want to go swimming or fishing in that for sure. Even in rubber boots, I didn't enjoy walking through that because of all the tangle of that curly leaf pondweed. And so I think it's pretty straightforward how impactful situations like that vegetation can be on aquatic recreation. So for swimming, for boating, the angling community, and I've been on a lot of boats over the past couple of years, and goodness, I've seen a lot of propellers gummed up with vegetation. You have to stop every 30 seconds and degunk the propeller and get the boat going again, kind of thing. So yeah, lots of negative impacts of excessive aquatic vegetation on aquatic recreation. And then not many of our aquatic invasive species are toxic, but I will point out yellow iris, pale yellow iris, yellow flag iris, pick your name. But that species is toxic to livestock. So that's a potential impact if, say, you have a dugout or a pond. Typically livestock would drink from that water, and they often graze on the vegetation surrounding wetlands and water bodies. So hypothetically, if yellow iris were to infest around habitats like that, you could have livestock accidentally graze on pale yellow iris, which again is toxic. So not yeah, toxicity is more of a consideration for our terrestrial weeds for the most part. A lot of them are toxic. Not as much for the aquatic invasives, but yellow iris would be the one exception there. So if we do have an aquatic invasive species arrive and it causes an infestation, what can we do about it? Well, I'm sure you folks have noticed we are not particularly aquatic organisms. Humans don't typically swim around in the bottom of lakes. And so, yeah, we're not aquatic. And so that just makes it harder for terrestrial organisms to manage an aquatic organism. And so, I've used lots of lawnmowers, lots of manual tools, lots of pesticides to deal with weeds. And all of our manual and mechanical options are not particularly feasible in a water body. I'm not going to drive my mower into that lake right there because that's not going to get me very far in my management objectives for that vegetation. So we're really limited on, yeah, essentially most of our manual and mechanical methods for controlling plants are irrelevant in wetlands and water bodies. And then in the case of pesticides, um, the use of pesticides in aquatic situations is very strict. So I'm not going to go through all those restrictions, but the point is there's a lot of rules to follow. It's very tedious. You have to use very specific chemicals on very specific species, and you require several approvals in order to do so. And that's notwithstanding the fact that it's incredibly expensive and time consuming and requires particular expertise in order to even consider such an aquatic application of a pesticide. So time, money, expertise, and all of these, in my opinion, appropriately strict regulations makes it so that there are very few situations in which you can meaningfully apply a pesticide in an aquatic situation. And of course, it's further exacerbated by the challenge of flowing water. Sometimes water doesn't move very much in some lakes and ponds, but in our rivers and streams, of course, the water moves, and so do the organisms. So if you have an aquatic invasive species infest a flowing body of water, the downstream spread of that organism is essentially inevitable. unless you're really lucky and you can catch it early or something. But otherwise, yeah, a flowing system, there's not much you can do once the species is well established because it can just swim upstream, swim downstream, flow upstream, flow downstream, right? So that's why prevention is key. And that's a lot of invasive species messaging's priority is to avoid the introduction altogether. And in Alberta, we're very sheltered in many ways. There's a lot of aquatic invasive species in North America and around the world that we just don't have, particularly Alberta, Saskatchewan. We're very, very sheltered. And in many ways, for many species, we're the last holdouts in North America for a lot of those aquatic invasives just because they just haven't gotten to Alberta yet or were shielded by the mountains, the structure of our watersheds. But we do certainly have plenty of aquatic invasive problems. And I think that's what we're going to dive into as I continue here. I won't spend too much time on this, but I just want to cap for folks that there is legislation involved in aquatic invasive species. So here we have the Fisheries Alberta Act. Within this act, there is a defined list of 52 prohibited species, spanning many taxa, including fish, crayfish, snails, mussels, clams, aquatic diseases, and of course, aquatic plants. And this act prohibits the possession, release, and importation of those 52 species. Excuse me, and 5 of those prohibited species under the Fisheries Alberta Act are actually dually regulated under the Weed Control Act. So some of those are actually double whammies. There's 2 different pieces of legislation that list them as prohibited species and require property owners to do something about it. So let's dive into some species now. This is where I shine the most and where I get the most excited. So we're going to be talking about, first up, these will be the regulated species. So all of the forthcoming species are prohibited, noxious on the Weed Control Act, and or prohibited under the Fisheries Alberta Act. So to start, we're going to talk about Phragmites or common reed. If anyone here has spent time in Ontario, if you're from Ontario, you have relatives in Ontario, you've probably heard about the Phragmites issue. Ontario folks, I find they are just like the most visceral in their reactions to Phragmites. They know it so well from along their highways and from their cabins on their lakes and such. Ironically, this photo, I'm actually not showing the invasive Phragmites. This is actually the native one. I just like the photo, so I selfishly want to include it. But we'll dive into the Phragmites now. And so I'm not sure if folks are all aware, but Phragmites is a bit of a complicated story because we have not one, but 2 types of Phragmites. So there's 2 subspecies within the Phragmites australis species. So we have Phragmites australis subspecies americanus. That is called American reed. That is native to North America, and it is not invasive. It evolved here, it's been here a long time, and it behaves and looks fairly differently from the invasive Phragmites. In contrast, the Phragmites australis subspecies australis, that is the Eurasian species that has been introduced here. It's a bit debated on how it got here initially, whether it was contaminated seed, whether it was deliberately introduced for anti-erosion purposes. So it's not totally clear how it got to North America or what the initial reason for introduction was, but it's here nonetheless. So both of the Phragmites subspecies are facultative aquatic, so they can do really well in like a foot or 2 of water. If they are out of the water, they do love saturated soil, though it's very impressive with their amazing rhizome systems. They can grow upland quite a ways, but also into fairly deep water. So they have a really wide area that they can occupy, all the way from several feet of sitting water to fairly mesic upland soil. So there's no shortage of habitat for them because they do very well in wet ditches even. So lots of our lakes, rivers, irrigation canals are certainly agreeable habitat for our invasive Phragmites, but so too are just wet ditches along our highways and railroad tracks. And so the invasive subspecies is quite common essentially across the eastern half of North America, kind of Winnipeg eastward, and the eastern half of the US have a lot of the invasive Phragmites. The western half of the US has less, but it's still very much so present in large numbers in some places. Western Canada is there's not much. So Saskatchewan, Alberta, BC are pretty sheltered from the invasive Phragmites. We don't have much, though that story has been kind of changing over the past few years. And so I'm excited to update you on maybe some success we've had in Alberta. And I love this photo. This is one of my favorite photos. This is when I was with the provincial government, and I am sporting none other than Balthazar, the nearly 13-foot tall invasive Phragmites stem, which is the tallest we have recorded in Alberta. That is paled in comparison to some in Ontario. I've heard reports of 16 and 18-foot Phragmites in Alberta, so it does get taller with a longer growing season and more heat units and perhaps more water available to it. But yeah, there's no photo editing done in that photo. I'm about 6 feet tall, and that's a nearly 13-foot tall stem. So it's truly a colossal species. I forget if I said this already. This is a grass. Phragmites is a grass. It's in the grass family. And I think people probably don't spend much time thinking about grasses of that size, but I like to think of it like an invasive bamboo or invasive corn or something. Yeah, it's an incredible plant. And for folks who don't know much about grass, the population behind me is one organism. That is not multiple, like, we're not actually looking at hundreds of different, sprouts of grass. That's actually one single organism, all connected underground to the same rhizome system. So it's this underground stem that spreads horizontally through the soil, and it puts up new shoots as it goes. And it forms this huge mass that can collect water and spread it throughout the plant, which is why it can grow so far upland as long as part of the population is connected to water. So very similar to our trembling aspen, which is a very common tree species in Alberta. It reproduces in the same way. It's got these amazing rhizomes that spread underground and put up new shoots. In the case of trembling aspen, into whole forests. And I will be honest, walking through that population behind me, it did feel like walking through an eerie grass forest. So just an incredible plant. I love these photos. So this upper left photo, this is a stormwater pond in Spruce Grove, west of Edmonton. So this is within the city, and we went to check on a potential report of invasive Phragmites, and boy, were we blown away. So this population, I'm up on a hill taking a picture over it. It was about 110 meters long. I'll say that again, 110 meters long. So that's one organism, one single organism, just absolutely bulldozing its way across. You can see how thick it is, how dense it is, right? There are no other species surviving within that. That is a true and pure monoculture of invasive Phragmites, and that is offering no biodiversity within that stand. It's just incredible. You can also see this path cut through the middle. That is because of the very poor drainage manager who was tasked with trying to find his valve in his stormwater pond and had to keep managing this crazy vegetation that was blocking his access to his stormwater pond valve. And so I think that's a great example of the vegetation management impacts of species like invasive Phragmites. If you need to access your infrastructure, well, that is a giant A, physical barrier, and B, fire hazard to deal with. And I love the left side of the photo. You can see that spruce tree has some Phragmites stems growing up through it. Those stems are about 8 feet tall, growing up through a spruce tree. And I think folks hopefully are aware growing beneath a spruce tree is not a very hospitable location for a plant to grow. Spruce and pine needles are allelopathic, so they suppress the growth of other plants. The soil gets very, very acidic, and you often just have a kind of a dead zone underneath spruce trees. And so I think that's just a great example of like nothing can stop that Phragmites. It's truly amazing, and it continues well to the left of the spruce tree. I just couldn't get it in the photo, so that's where you get you get the rest of the 110 meters or so. It continues off that way. And you can also see looking down towards the water, the Phragmites does go into the water a bit. And normally you can see in the background, such a pond is normally bounded by cattails, our broadleaf cattail, very common species. It's one of our most competitive aquatic plants. Very important keystone species for lots of wildlife. Lots of species eat it. Like it's a very important wetland species, very common and highly competitive. And you can see that the impact of this invasive Phragmites population is that it has outcompeted cattails. And it is the only aquatic invasive plant that I have seen actively outcompete cattails. Phragmites, perhaps slowly, but gradually bulldozes its way through cattails and kills them off. And I've never seen anything else do that. So I find that to be a really shocking and striking example of what invasive Phragmites can do in an aquatic system like this. And of course, you can see on the foreground edge of the population, you've got that lighter colored grass, and that's where the mowing crew has actually been mowing down the upland edge of that Phragmites colony. So it was actually bigger than that at some point. It's just that the vegetation crew had to knock it back so they could keep their regular mowing pattern, which I find really funny. So just an incredible plant. It's got these amazing torch-like seed heads. The seeds actually have little tufts of white hair on them, which allows for airborne distribution. And so we think that the large, like many kilometer long stretches of invasive Phragmites along railways in eastern Canada and the United States is where those airborne seeds produced in incredible abundance are catching on trains. And the trains are bringing them into Alberta. And so most of our initial cases in Alberta occurred along railroad tracks, and then lots of our railways parallel with major transportation corridors. So our highways, and there's often a wet ditch in between a railroad and a highway. And then now we suspect that ditch mowers have actually been picking up seeds from these colonies as they mow over them and spread those seeds elsewhere. So just for example, the Anthony Henday is the ring road around Edmonton. I suspect I might have more of a southern audience tonight, but that's our ring road around Edmonton, and I think it has somewhere between like 12 or 13 populations of invasive Phragmites just around that road, not including within the city, not including near around the outside of the city. Just our ring road around Edmonton has at least a dozen of these invasive Phragmites populations. So that's kind of been the vector for how it's been getting into Alberta. And I'll just touch on the native Phragmites now. So this is Phragmites australis americanus, the native subspecies. You can see it looks a bit different. These seed heads are a lot more sparse. They're less dense. They're more open, in contrast to these dense torch-like seed heads in the invasive kind. So the native subspecies, this population on the left, I would say, is representative of what I usually see. So they tend to form these pretty small clumps. They don't tend to get nearly as tall, not nearly as dense, and they don't tend to form massive walls of nightmare bamboo grass like the invasive Phragmites does. Though there are a handful of exceptions, I would say West Cove in Lac Saint Anne. If anyone spends time around there, there's a little rock island of some kind near Farmers Island, and that island is pure native Phragmites, and it's the largest I've ever seen. So that's a pretty massive exception, but otherwise, yeah, generally does not behave like the invasive Phragmites does. How do we tell them apart? Well, again, there's that general difference of the seed head, but the most reliable diagnostic feature is the color in the stem. So the lower stems you can see in these photos, they have this lovely intense red, intense purplish color. I like to call it the red wine stems. And that's the most reliable phenotypic indicator of the native subspecies of Phragmites. That said, genetic testing is available as well. Excuse me. So genetic testing can differentiate the native, invasive, and hybrid Phragmites, though the hybrid's extremely rare. It's not found very often. So yeah, that is a possibility. If you want to learn more about the genetic testing, please reach out to me afterwards. Be happy to talk more about that. But yeah, the Alberta Plant Health Lab can run a genetic diagnostic to differentiate the subspecies. So this is the map of invasive Phragmites in Alberta. And this is the best looking map we're going to be looking at today. The rest of the maps get more depressing. And so it's no shock to those who are familiar with invasive species. In general, we're talking about losing battles quickly or losing battles slowly. And there's not a ton of success stories to point to, just because invasive species are hard to manage. And prevention is usually the best approach if we can just keep it out. Unfortunately, invasive Phragmites is very much so showing up in Alberta. But I am really excited and proud of this map here. So this map is a little bit out of date now. We're up to something like 100-ish locations of invasive Phragmites in the province. And you can see the black X's. I don't know where my legend went. I had a legend. Anyways, the black X's are populations of invasive Phragmites that have been eradicated, which is really exciting. So you can see there's quite a few of them. And all of the blue dots are actually Phragmites populations that have received control action of some kind at least once. For the most part, that is at least one herbicide application. I think there was one population that was excavated, and maybe another that was smothered. But nonetheless, there's a very, very successful response effort to invasive Phragmites in Alberta. Huge shout out to Alberta Transportation. They just truly did incredible. They were so responsive back in the days when I was directing reports to them. They usually had a crew out within the same week that I submitted a report to act on the invasive Phragmites in our highway right of ways in those wet ditches. So yeah, they did a really bang up job, super impressive, and those results seem to have lasted. So invasive Phragmites seems to be our one the closest thing to a success story, perhaps we can say, for aquatic invasive species. Obviously, we have a success story with rats, right? Rat-free Alberta, 75th anniversary last year. So it's not that we have lost or are losing to everything, but the rest of the presentation will for sure get a bit bleaker post Phragmites. So I like smiling at this map before I feel sad feelings in the following slides. So next up is purple loosestrife. Purple loosestrife has these lovely magenta, pink, purple spikes, lovely tall spikes, often grown in gardens. In fact, I saw in the city of Edmonton a few years ago, it was one of the like community who has like the prettiest yard contest that the city ran. And one of the winning yards had a purple loosestrife front and center in their garden. And full credit, it is a beautiful species, right? That's how a lot of these things start, right? It's a beautiful plant. People think it's beautiful. They want it in their garden, or they want it in their local wetland, or to grow along their part of the shoreline at their lake cabin, and then things decline quickly from there. So purple loosestrife could easily be confused with some of our common species like fireweed, right? Fireweed is very common, has a lovely, very tall pink magenta spikes. The nice quick way to differentiate the two is that fireweed always has floral parts of four. So it has four petals, four sepals. The stigma is divided into four parts. So yeah, parts of four in fireweed, whereas purple loosestrife will always be five, six, or seven petals, never four. So that's one of the good ways to tell them apart. I always just tell people, count the petals. If you count four, it's native. If you count five, six, or seven, send me a picture. It might be a problem. So and there's incredible reproductive capacity in purple loosestrife as well. It forms these abundant seed capsules. And I believe I read a very old study that said up to 2.6 million seeds was the highest they'd counted for a mature purple loosestrife plant. So incredibly tiny seeds produced in incredible abundance allows for incredible reproductive capacity. So you can see the seed spikes not yet dry, still developing in the photo on the left. And boy, I hate including this photo on the right. I do this to myself every time. It's deeply unflattering, and my eyes rolling to the back of my head like I am possessed. So I don't know why I keep showing this, except for the fact that it lovely illustrates how tall invasive purple loosestrife can get. So you can see that tallest flower spike is actually bent out of the photo. We're looking at an 8-foot tall plant if I'm coming in around 6 feet. So that's an incredibly tall plant. That's one stem of that plant. And, our cattails for sure get very tall in Alberta, but that even has the ability to exceed the tops of our cattails, which just for context in a wetland, right? Like that's about as tall as vegetation gets. So it's a really impressive plant. Unfortunately, it is pretty widespread in the central Alberta area. Bow River folks, you have some down there, but there is an ongoing collaboration with a couple different partners doing management of that purple loosestrife. And my understanding is that they are holding it at bay at least, if not succeeding. So that's great to hear. Yeah, you can see the concentration, our urban centers for sure, with those black X's being that partnership down in the Bow River that's responding to the purple loosestrife, which is fantastic. Wabamun Lake, west of Edmonton, about an hour, is probably the largest crown water body infestation of purple loosestrife. It's a pretty tough situation. They have some massive cattail and bulrush marshes that are pretty heavily infested, and they look beautiful. But unfortunately, those purple loosestrifes are filling in the density of those marshes significantly and pushing out lots of the smaller species, which is really unfortunate. So beautiful plant, but again, that's how all these problems start, right? Is they look beautiful and then they run amok. Next up, we've got Himalayan balsam. There's probably no surprise that this species is also referred to as poor man's orchid. So this is a commonly grown garden plant for these incredibly lush and beautiful flowers. They're incredibly large and produced in great abundance. These plants grow very tall. I personally think they have rather pleasing foliage as well. Like they're just nice plants to look at, and they come all the way from white to light pink to peach to magenta. So really lovely plants. They have explosive seed pods, and that is not hyperbole. So once their pods mature, they actually do have an explosive release mechanism that sends the seeds flying over large distances, which is part of how species in this genus reproduce. We do have two native relatives. We have spotted jewelweed and touch-me-not balsam. Their flowers are orangish yellow and yellow respectively. So in bloom, they do not look similar. They are not pink, but vegetatively, they can look quite similar. And so I've had to support a lot of folks in a lot of situations trying to figure out which impatiens species they have, just because the leaves do look similar, especially when they're young. So I did grow this in my garden when I was a child. I didn't know better. Don't worry, it's long eradicated, and I did not introduce it anywhere that it didn't belong. But I do remember it was one of the toughest weeds I had to fight, more so than thistles and dandelions. So it's a really impressive plant, really beautiful. And here you can see a great example of the Himalayan balsam infesting a drying cattail marsh. The cattails were not doing so great this year, and you can see just how much the Himalayan balsam has taken over everything in and around and in between. There's just no spot left open by the Himalayan balsam. Again, as pretty as it is, right? I see why people call it poor man's orchid, because they are beautiful orchid-like flowers. They're not orchids, but they're beautiful like that and so easy to grow. So I get it. And then on this fantastic photo on the right, we've got what is my tallest Himalayan balsam individual. For context, these are annual plants. So these the vegetation dies completely each year, and they have to grow again from seed. And that is 8.5 to 9 feet tall in that photo on the right. So we're talking about corn or tall sunflower levels of height from this species, which is just incredible. And the map for it is pretty rough. It's in a lot of our creeks and rivers and wetlands and lakes. So obviously tons in the Edmonton area. It's been spread by a lot of like garden exchange kind of activities where people share garden plants. So it sure made a lot of headway through that in its early days. And there's some in Calgary. It is very much so maybe one of the more sensitive aquatic invasive plants. It's very fragile, like physically. It's very easy to pull out, and it definitely does not have much resilience when something dries out. So it does great on shorelines and in wetlands and such, but it doesn't do great if those disappear, which is why it's probably not as much of a threat to especially the grasslands region for wetlands that maybe often are full of water in May and June, but then fully dry by like August or September. So Himalayan balsam doesn't necessarily have all of the habitat available to it. It probably can't thrive in all of those situations, but yeah, where wetlands and water bodies persist with enough moisture, you can see it right just in the parkland and boreal around Edmonton. That's where it's done its best. So a truly beautiful menace, right? You can see that lovely hedge there of all those different shades of pink and white. I get why people love it. It's a beautiful plant, but they don't know what they're getting themselves into. Next up is flowering rush. Flowering rush. This is a bit more. We're trying to get more relevant to the Southerners in our audience. So flowering rush has these lovely umbrella-shaped clusters of pink flowers. These stamens are orange or yellow, and I think it's fantastic when the stamens aren't fully open. You have a very big contrast between this like vivid orange and vivid pink. Just for curiosity's sake, that's really not a common color combination in plants, that orange and pink. Usually stamens are consistently yellow or just kind of like a beige. They sometimes don't have a lot of color. So for them to be vivid orange is just kind of a unique color combination to see. Flowering rush, regrettably, is present in the Bow and South Saskatchewan rivers, much more so in the South Saskatchewan. And I'm curious if anyone can tell me if they know if this is true or not. But the Bow doesn't actually have much flowering rush, while the South Saskatchewan has an incredible abundance. And so I'm curious, like, is there a substrate difference? Like, is there some reason, like, is the Bow, does it just have a lot more like of a rock riverbed versus like sand and silt in the South Saskatchewan? I don't fully know the answer here. Generally, aquatic plants don't do so well in like large rock kind of substrate. They prefer softer soil so they can actually establish roots. So yeah, I don't know if anyone knows more about those rivers and what their riverbeds are like. I'd love to hear and maybe try to figure out why it's such a difference between the two of them. But unfortunately, flowering rush was introduced quite some time ago, and it has spread heavily well into Saskatchewan through the South Saskatchewan River now. And it's just an incredible plant. I think we'll talk about Lake Isle in the next slide, which is the largest flowering rush infestation in Canada, as far as we're aware. And there's a really cool fan boat aquatic herbicide application program occurring there. And I just think that's a really unique case because we don't talk about fan boats much in Alberta, right? We don't see those around. And I got to ride the fan boat, and it was really cool. So I just want to tell you about the fan boat. So here's Lake Isle. This is west of Edmonton, about an hour in summer 2024. And we were conducting a shoreline survey of the flowering rush infestation in Lake Isle. At its peak, it occupied to various levels of density about 26-ish kilometers of shoreline around Lake Isle, so a pretty substantial portion of the lake, mostly the west half of the lake. And so this photo shows the state of the infestation a full 2 years into the aquatic herbicide treatment program. So what you were seeing has actually been fully sprayed twice in the previous years, and this is still what remains of it. I will admit I did choose to photograph one of the worst areas of the infestation. Not the entire lake looks like this by any means, but this is after 2 years of intensive control work, right? And this is still how dense it is, extending, what are we, maybe 20 or 30 meters out from the cattails on the right to the Newfar pond lilies on the left, where the water starts to get too deep for the flowering rush. So that's just a huge, huge band of monoculture vegetation occupying so much of the lake. And think of that. Normally, you'd put your dock out to launch your boat or go paddling or whatever, and that dock would extend maybe somewhat beyond the cattails. Well, look how much more vegetation you have to fight with now just to even launch your boat or to throw your to cast your fish hook into the water. This is just a huge barrier to aquatic recreation. So I just think, yeah, it's an amazing, amazing monoculture, amazing what it can form. And yeah, that's here in Alberta, right? Like that's in our conditions. That's despite our winters that limit so many other invasive species. And yeah, flowering rush clearly thriving in that situation. And now you might say, well, like, sure, that does look like a dense forest of flowering rush, but there are some gaps, right? There's some open water in those photos. I went kayaking there with an underwater camera. I can assure you there are submerged leaves in every one of those alleged gaps in the flowering rush infestation. It is incredibly thick. I truly couldn't believe it until I looked at my own footage under the water, and it was just a forest. Like I wasn't even getting clear videos because it was just so much submerged flowering rush vegetation, which is really horrifying. And something you can't particularly see in this photo, honestly, you can't really see it or you can't really show it digitally. You just got to be there and see it for yourself. Flowering rush forms these massive mats of mud and roots. And these mats actually, after some time, lift up off the bottom of the lake and become floating mats. So a lot of what you see here is not actually anchored. It's just kind of mats of vegetation sitting there or only partially anchored. And so if a boat comes along or a strong wind or a storm or what have you, those mats can just float to a different part of the lake and establish new populations elsewhere. So you can actually, with my kayak paddle, for example, this summer, I took it and I was pushing the blade down on these mats and I could fully submerge these clumps of flowering rush. And then I took my paddle away and it would just slowly, eerily creep its way back up out of the water like a little like nightmare. It was truly horrifying to see just these massive mats of flowering rush that yeah can absolutely detach and send new voyagers elsewhere to establish new infestations. So it's just an amazing plant. I will say the South Saskatchewan River doesn't quite look like this, simply because it's flowing water, it's faster, there's more erosion, there's just less area for any aquatic vegetation to establish. But nonetheless, there's still some very large stretches of beautiful pink haze along the South Saskatchewan River where lots of our important and in many cases rare riparian vegetation, for example, Scirpus pallidus or I think pale bulrush, don't know what it is in English, But that's an S1 critically imperiled species in Alberta along the South Saskatchewan. And the only two places I found it are both in viable flower and rush habitat with flower and rush nearby. So that's a direct connection to a potential rare species that could be further threatened by the flowering rush. So I think the flowers are pretty distinctive, right? You've got those lovely pink flowers and those umbrella clusters. That said, though, when there aren't flowers, it's going to be pretty hard to identify. I'll just point out that flowering rush does have triangle leaves, so there's three sides to the leaves, or triangular in cross section, and it also has this kind of red maroon coloration in the lower leaves. Not always, but it's usually there at least later in the season. That coloration is pretty distinctive. I have a lot of experience with aquatic and wetland plants. I can't really think of exceptions to that rule, but yeah, few or none of our native aquatic and wetland vegetation have that kind of coloration in the lower leaves. So yeah, that red maroon color is pretty diagnostic if you don't have flowers available. If you're not sure, send me pictures. So here's our flowering rush map. You can see that lovely squiggly band of orange down in the southeast. That is, of course, the South Saskatchewan River infestation. That was a historical Alberta Environment Survey through the river. So there's plenty of flowering rush all through there. And yeah, I was referring to Sandy Point Park, kind of north of Medicine Hat there, where I had seen, the rare Scirpus pallidus and something like 500 meters of dense flowering rush in the all along the shore after that. So lots of flowering rush doing great there. The CFIA did approve a biocontrol agent for release in Canada in 2024. My understanding is that the rearing of that insect, it's a weevil, a mining weevil, Bagus nodulosus, if I'm pronouncing it correct. So there is a biocontrol agent approved, which is exciting. It has not yet been released in Alberta. My understanding is that Alberta Environment hopes to. My understanding, though, is that there's a bit of a wait list. It takes quite some time to rear the insect, and there's a big wait list of people waiting on orders for that insect. So I hope it makes its way there eventually, because not much else can be done about the fire and rush at this time, in at least in our crown water bodies, or at least in our rivers that serve irrigation. There's a whole pesticide story behind that of why we can't use our pesticide options in the rivers in the south. So happy to talk more about that if someone has questions afterwards. Next up is curly leaf pondweed, or Potamogeton crispus. This is a really weird and upsetting story. I really like telling this one. There's a bit of a surprise twist in this story. So give me one sec. I'm losing my voice here. So curly leaf pondweed, we're still talking about prohibited, legislatively prohibited species. So curly leaf pondweed is a bit different from the species we've talked about so far. This is a fully submerged plant. Everything else we've talked about has been an emergent species. So their roots and lower stems may be submerged, but otherwise they've been coming up out of the water. Curly leaf is different. It is a fully vegetatively submerged species. It can grow very deep as long as there's enough light penetration into the water. So yeah, curly leaf pondweed is fully underwater. The flowers and seeds can come maybe an inch or two above the water, or they can be at the water's surface. But otherwise, the plants are submerged. They have these fantastic curly leaves. In botany, the term we'd use for that is crisped, hence the specific epithet of crispus. For normal folks, you can use language like crinkle cut French fries or lasagna noodles, which I truly do think is an incredibly accurate analogy for this distinct leaf shape in Potamogeton crispus. So yeah, these crisps, these French fry lasagna noodle leaves are very unique to this species. It's quite hard to mix this up with other species. Arguably there's a couple other native aquatic pondweeds that maybe you could confuse it, but again, if you just remember crinkle cut French fry lasagna noodle, that is absolutely a distinct and reliable feature for identifying this species. And so here's where we get to the kind of weird story with curly leaf pondweed. So once upon a time, August 2024, I had a chocolate milkshake in my hand. It was a Saturday night, 25 degrees, nice gentle breeze. I was in Police Point Park in Medicine Hat. I was on a little vacation, having a great time. There was a local band playing music in the park across the river. Truly, the setting was sublime. And I'm a botanist primarily, so I was, walking along the river looking at plants. There's some lovely, lovely leopard frogs hopping around. It was my first time seeing leopard frogs. They're so cool, and it was a wonderful evening. But then I saw a plant in the water that I didn't recognize. And pardon me if this is egotistical, but I'm pretty strong botanist, especially with Alberta species. Um, I recognize most things in Alberta. It's not common that you can give me a plant in Alberta that I truly don't recognize. And so I saw something I didn't recognize, and I went, oh, huh, that's weird. So I tippy-toed out on the rocks with my milkshake in hand, and I carefully grabbed this nasty clump of mud and aquatic mush, and I looked at it, and I went, oh, oh no, oh, those are curly leaves. Is that what I think it is? And yes, skipping ahead, and after some frantic phone calls with my boss on a weekend, I ultimately found out that these were indeed curly leaf pondweed plants that were in the South Saskatchewan River, which of course is a crown water body, and that was a big concern. So I started ringing all the alarm bells and telling everyone like, oh my gosh, there's curly leaf pondweed, this is bad. And skipping ahead for a while, we had put out an alert, and then a colleague sent us a study written by an author named Grow, and the study was published in 1944. This study described Potamogeton crispus present in the Elbow River in Calgary in the 1940s. And for folks who don't know all of our water connectivity, the Elbow River within the city of Calgary promptly joins the Bow River, which then flows into the South Saskatchewan and then further eastward. So those rivers are all connected, flowing water. And if this species was well established in the Elbow River in the 40s at least, right? At least by 1944, it was in abundance there apparently. So that was pretty shocking, and that kind of made us try to figure out, well, wait, if it's been in that water since the 40s, has it been here the whole time? And we can't look back in a magical crystal ball through time to see what the truth is, but it's very possible, it's very probable that curly leaf pondweed was in fact present in Alberta in those rivers that whole time, and simply was going minimally detected. I do want to clarify, I did not technically discover curly leaf pondweed. I'm just the one who raised the alarm. There were a handful of botanists who knew of records of this species being present in Alberta before that time. However, unfortunately, those botanists didn't seem to get consulted by the politicians and biologists with the Alberta government who ultimately came up with the Fisheries Alberta Act prohibited species. I don't mean to be too critical, but there was clearly a lapse in the thoroughness of their risk assessment when they evaluated those species, because you can find North America wide publications from years prior to 2015 when the Fisheries Alberta Act was made into law. You can find publications that do show that dot in the Elbow River referring to the 1944 study on the North America wide maps. So maybe not Alberta biologists specifically, but there were clearly biologists in North America doing North American analyses who had that in their data sets. So I think that's really horrifying and scary, right? That this species could go so under the radar for so long that no one in invasive species management and none of the major biologists in our provincial, in Alberta environments, whatever, knew about this. So that's really, really concerning that it can go under the radar like that. And I'm kind of scared that that could happen with other species, right? So I think it's a really, I mean, let's make this a more productive analysis rather than just me absolutely roasting the provincial government. Let's say everyone should be curious. We need to be curious about what's in our lakes and our rivers and our irrigation systems. If you see something you don't recognize, right? That's what I did. I just saw something. I was like, oh, what's that? Just be curious. Take a picture, ask someone, try to figure it out, post it to iNaturalist. Just please do something with that information. Because I recall when this first was released and this conversation was happening following August 2024, there was lots of anglers that wrote in who were saying, hey, well, I've been fishing in the Bow and the South Saskatchewan River for years, and I've been catching this on my hook for a long time. This is in my favorite fishing hole. Like, this isn't new. I'm like, cool, that's fair. but you didn't do anything about it. You didn't ask what it was. You weren't curious about it. And if someone maybe decades ago had first encountered this and was more curious about it, maybe this is something that could have been caught earlier. And so I really hope that's the case for other invasive species, that we catch them early enough that we can do something about them. Um, so yeah, kind of a weird and wild story. Again, I'm sorry, maybe I'm being too mean to the province. But yeah, I think it's an important lesson that when you are evaluating invasive species, it is important to conduct a thorough and thoughtful risk assessment that actually evaluates where that species already exists in the country and the continent, because you might be in for an unpleasant surprise. And I just added a couple more pictures because I love them. But right, isn't that crinkle cut French fry or lasagna noodle analogy? Like that is so spot on for these leaves. I just love it. I think it's fantastic. And I think my next slide here. So this is the province's map of the curly-leaf pondweed, and this is out of date already. So I regret to inform folks that I did find the first detection of curly-leaf pondweed in summer 2025 in the Old Man River. So Lethbridge down at the bottom there in yellow, that was the Old Man River, and unfortunately, curly-leaf pondweed is indeed present there. How long has that been there? God knows. We do not know the true answer, but if it's been in the Elbow River since potentially the 1940s or perhaps earlier, who's to say? We don't really know. So yeah, so this map needs a nice shiny new dot there on the Old Man River in Lethbridge. Okay, how am I doing on time here? I'll try to wrap this up soonish, or wrap up aquatics at least. So next up is Eurasian water milfoil. This is what we all thought was going to be the next aquatic plant to arrive in Alberta. It's present across most of North America. It is present in BC in several major locations. And so we figured, oh, someone taking their boat from Alberta to BC for the summer, going to the Shuswap or the Okanagan is going to bring it back. And excuse me, so far that has not happened, at least not that we are aware. But I mean, curly-leaf pondweed went under the radar for so long. So Eurasian water milfoil is further complicated by very similar morphology to a common and native northern milfoil. So we do have a very, very similar and abundant native look-alike. So it's possible we could have. I would never rule out that we have Eurasian water milfoil in Alberta. It just has not yet been confirmed. So I figure that'll happen at some point. I just hope we can catch it early enough that something can be done. But yeah, so Eurasian water milfoil not yet here. And I think my next slide will show the comparison. So this is the nice and handy tool, Eurasian versus the native milfoils. The invasive type typically has far more leaflets. I find when I count specimens, it's usually somewhere from 28 to 40 leaflets. So that's all those little side branches coming off the feathery leaves. So yeah, usually like 30-ish or over 30 of those versus the native milfoil species, of which we have two. I don't need to go into that too much, but they usually have 20 or fewer of those side leaflets. So generally, I kind of use that rough rule of over 20, under 20. Over 20 is probably the invasive one. Take a picture, tell someone. If it's under 20, we might not have to worry as much. But you can still take a picture anyways and post it to iNaturalist or something, and someone can come along and tell you if you're right or wrong. Oh, I did put, okay, terrific. I have non-plant species in here too. I wasn't sure what I included in this. Sorry, I've been making a lot of presentations for a lot of different organizations and they all blur together. So if anyone is into fishing, here we have Prussian carp. For our southern audience, you folks are swimming in Prussian carp. So this is an invasive fish species that is incredibly abundant in the southern part of the province, especially. So the Bow, South Saskatchewan, Old Man, and Red Deer rivers are infested with Prussian carp, as are the irrigation reservoirs and the canals associated with those rivers, and things like Dalemead Lake and Frank Lake and things like that in the south are heavily infested with Prussian carp, which is unfortunate. So Prussian carp have very similar problems to goldfish. Also, species-wise, it's incredibly closely related to goldfish. It's essentially just a kind of silvery, brown, gray version of goldfish. Very closely related, very similar issues, incredible reproductive capacity. Their populations can explode to unreal levels. For example, a stormwater pond here in Edmonton took out 40,000 fish from a single stormwater pond in a treatment in 2024. And I want to say, oh, I'm blanking on the name, but there was a small town in southern Alberta. Pardon me, I'm blanking on the name right now. But they pulled out something like 65,000 depression carp and or goldfish. Not I don't know. I think it was both, if I remember from the photos correctly. So just incredible amounts of fish being pulled out, even out of just stormwater ponds. So incredible reproductive capacity. And so just a hot tip for folks: if you do catch one of these and it's alive, don't release it back into the water. Technically, that's illegal because it is prohibited under federal law, the Federal Fisheries Act, to release a non-native organism into a body of water. So the advice from the provincial government is catch it, kill it. So that's what you're supposed to do with aquatic invasive species like Prussian carp or goldfish. Um, yeah, so be sure to not release those back. And unfortunately, Prussian carp, Alberta is a bit of the we are ground zero essentially. That's where Prussian carp was first detected in North America, and unfortunately, with the flow of water eastward, we have given it to Saskatchewan as well. And there are many biologists in the United States who are very nervous and looking closely at this issue and modeling, pardon me, the spread of Prussian carp that could occur in the U.S. Should it be introduced there. Sure, this is the treatment in Edmonton. I got to see the fish pooling along the edges of the pond as they were conducting a pesticide treatment to kill the fish. And you can see it was very hard to get good photos, but there was actually decorated goldfish. So that's like a goldfish with black on it on the left there that had been released as well. Though I believe that the genetic test came back as primarily Prussian carp. So could well have been both goldfish and Prussian carp released into that pond. Also a pike somehow. So, anyways, there's a whole dramatic story behind it. I'll maybe save that for another time. But yeah, we've got invasive fish in Alberta. Common carp was our first detection in 2024, our first common carp in East Pit Lake. And so, how did that fish get there? It's an isolated pond. There's no inflow or outflow. You have to hike in about 10 minutes. So it's really concerning because presumably the only way that fish could get there is illegal live transfer and release. So in other words, a live fish in a bucket, which does seem to be the case for goldfish and for Prussian carp. That's often how they're spread, and that's what Fish and Wildlife officers catch that behavior and stop it. But unfortunately, that behavior seems to be widespread. So it's really concerning, given that the closest common carp was otherwise hundreds of kilometers away from East Pit Lake. There's also been the first detection of pumpkin seed in Alberta. It's native to North America, but mostly to the east coast, to freshwater over that way. It is present in BC. It's been introduced into BC, and at Cardiff Trout Pond were the first occurrences of both pumpkin seed and now black crappie as well in Alberta. So just a whole bunch. East Pit Lake is a tough situation with the common carp. It also has koi, and then this Cardiff Trout Pond has pumpkin seed, black crappie, Prussian carp, crayfish, which have been introduced pretty much everywhere. I feel like there was another one. I'm blanking. Oh, I think someone had put a largemouth bass into Cardiff Trout Pond. The bass probably didn't survive winter, but that's 5 non-native species that the province does not stock into that pond. So how are they getting there? It's really concerning behavior, and there's no shortage of species popping up. So, anyways, that's the status for some of our fish. Zebra and quagga mussels, excuse me, they are not yet present in Alberta. They have never been confirmed in Alberta at this time. But boy, we're getting scared here in Alberta. So these are the invasive freshwater mussels that have devastated the Great Lakes, utterly collapsed the fisheries there. Many dace species, for example, have gone extinct in the Great Lakes due to the massive ecosystem impacts of zebra and quagga mussels. Their numbers in the trillions or more, who knows, covering massive swaths of the Great Lakes and seriously negatively impacting aquatic infrastructure where due to their ability to attach themselves onto hard surfaces. So yeah, just a hot tip for folks. If you see a shell around a lake or river in Alberta, it doesn't necessarily mean it's a zebra or quagga mussel. We do have native mussels and clams in Alberta. but our native species do not attach themselves to hard surfaces. They're just mud sitters. They sit in the mud, they do their thing. They don't attach themselves onto surfaces. But as you can see in these photos, zebra and quagga mussels encrust onto sticks, onto rocks, onto metal, onto your boat propellers, things like that. So that's why it's really important to clean, drain, dry your watercraft and to stop at inspection stations along our highways, especially if you're coming in out of the province, so that you can get your watercraft inspected for invasive hitchhikers like the zebra and quagga mussels. And I'll recommend this documentary to everyone. I'm sure you're all excited for more information after hearing me babble for an hour already. But this documentary called All Too Clear by TVO. It's a three-part documentary. It's free on YouTube. There's 3 episodes, about 45 minutes each, and they have amazing underwater drone footage of the impacts of zebra and quagga mussels on the Great Lakes. Amazing videos of the fish as well, and they talk about all the ecosystem and economic and aquatic recreation impacts of the invasive mussel damage caused to the Great Lakes by these mussels. So not in Alberta yet, as far as we know, but again, curly leaf pondweed went undetected for a very long time. There's questions perhaps about whether Eurasian water milfoil is or is not present here, and so yeah, I'm always very nervous about the zebra and quagga mussels. Though there's often false scares just because people see shells, often due to our native mussel and clam species, and they assume any shell in Alberta means a zebra or quagga mussel, which again is not quite the case. I think for time, I'm going to skip this quick. Crayfish are pretty much everywhere. Arguably native to the Beaver River watershed, which is a cold lake area. Obviously, folks are like, well, those are kind of everywhere. I've probably seen them in every lake and pond and river in the province, and that's probably mostly true. They are almost everywhere. And their claws can be this fantastic blue color. Super cool. But don't spread them. It's legal. All right, here's our native mussel and clams quick. So again, zebra quagga. Also, we have a third invasive mussel in North America now. Golden mussels are now present in California. Similar issues. They attach themselves onto hard surfaces so they can clog water intakes and pipes. But yeah, just a reminder to folks, please, if you ever see a shell in Alberta, take a picture because we need an expert to look at it. We do have native mussels and clams. Here's an assortment of them. I've got fingernail clams. I've got a fat mucket. I've got euglisa clams, and I've got a white heel splitter. So those are what some of our native species look like. They can be extremely small or extremely large, right? That's basically a hockey puck for that white heel splitter in my hand. So just yeah, they can range widely in size, but again, none of our native mussels and clams attach themselves. It's only the invasive mussels that attach themselves to hard surfaces. So always take a picture, send it to Alberta Environment, upload it to EdMaps, put it on iNaturalist, send it to me. Please just, yeah, send it to someone. Make sure shells get sent to someone. For these 52 prohibited species in Alberta under the Fisheries Alberta Act, there is a guide that has been developed by Alberta Environment. So they have this lovely pocket guide you can access. You can potentially request physical ones from the provincial government's Aquatic Invasive Species Program. If you want to know more about that, let me know and I can probably connect you to the right people. Otherwise, there is, of course, this freely available PDF online. Turning to unregulated species now. So now we are outside the law. No, I'm kidding. But these species are not present on any legislation, but I still think they're worth highlighting because they are non-native and they are now present in Alberta in some extent. So the species on the left here, this is Nasturtium officinale. So this is a small mustard, an aquatic mustard species that has shown up in some very weird places. So in Banff, there's those caves, and then there's some ponds and walking trails outside of the caves, and that is where some really weird species have shown up. So there's an invasive fish that's been introduced there, and there's this nasturtium as well. I think watercress in English. Sorry, folks, they mostly operate in Latin and Greek these days. I think it's called watercress in English, but it's shown up there. Also, Big Hill Springs Provincial Park. I want to say that's like, what is that, like north of Cochrane, something like that. Lovely little provincial park, kind of middle of nowhere spot. Very cool spot though. And unfortunately, yeah, somehow this watercress has been introduced there and has spread a fair bit. It's not the biggest plant, and so that's probably just inherently a size limiting factor. It's probably not the highest threat species, but nonetheless, excuse me, has formed a fair amount of vegetation in that creek. In the middle, we have this lovely blue flower with a yellow center. Folks might recognize that as a forget-me-not, and this is none other than water forget-me-not. This is a new arrival to Alberta, first confirmed in 2024. It's unfortunately present in several places around Wabamun Lake now. Again, it's fairly size limited. It's not the most large and competitive species, probably not the highest threat, but there are some jurisdictions that have prohibited its sale because of its potential invasive impacts. So that's kind of a new arrival. And then on the right, we have the narrow-leaved cattail. And so the cattails can get confusing. I won't spend too much time on it for now. We have, again, an incredibly abundant and common native cattail, the broad-leaved cattail. Unfortunately, Alberta was pretty much the last holdout in North America that didn't have the invasive narrow-leaved cattail, and that no longer seems to be the case. So unfortunately, that is present. That is the Chinook Rotary Park ponds. There's artificial ponds there in Calgary. So if you want to go there, you can see some skinnier looking cattail leaves and seed heads. And that's the invasive one. And unfortunately, they can hybridize into an even more vigorous parent. So super cattail called Typha crossglauca. So yeah, we'll see how that develops. But that's really unfortunate that we were the last holdout, and that is no longer the case. I'll skip this slide for time. Aquatic plants. We've talked about a lot of things in this PowerPoint. There's a lot of species. We have tons of native wetland and aquatic plants. So it can be really hard to identify them. And this is an open invitation to anyone. That is my phone number. That is my email. Please take pictures of aquatic plants. I think just given that curly-leaf pondweed story, right? We just need more people looking. We need more monitoring. We need more eyes on the situation to catch invasive species early enough that we can actually do something about them. So I mean, ideally, if you do find an aquatic invasive species, please report it to Alberta Environment. That is ideally where it would go. If you're not sure, if you're just curious, if you want an identification, a genuine open invitation, text me pictures, email me pictures. If you're already using iNaturalist, that's great too. Post them to iNaturalist. You're welcome to tag me as well. There's lots of other folks that can help with that too, though. But yeah, like I said with the curly leaf pondweed story, just be curious. Take an interest in what's in our lakes and rivers, what belongs there, what doesn't in terms of species, and take pictures. So I invite everyone to do so. Here's all the reporting mechanisms. You can report to the provincial government's program email for aquatic invasive species through EDMAPS. There's a hotline you can call. I don't work for them anymore, so I can say the hotline is kind of garbage now because they de-staffed it and it's just a voicemail, which is really dumb. But there are lots of ways that you can report. And again, open invitation. You can text or email me pictures of aquatic plants and shells as well, and I'll do my best to help you out. And boy, as I'm burning through my voice and everyone's probably ready for bed, I'll turn to our terrestrial invasive plants. I'm not covering everything by any means. That would require multiple different webinars to cover all the species, but I just want to cover some of the growing and some of the new or encroaching threats to Alberta. So just I'll start with thistles, for example. Obviously, we have some very common invasive thistles. We have Canada thistle and perennial sow thistle, very common major agricultural issues. Calgary folks, you're probably familiar with nodding thistle. There's a fair few construction areas and also Nose Hill Park that have lots of nodding thistle, which is prohibited. Even though it's so cool, I think those flowers are just amazing. Such a cool plant. But yeah, a bit of a nasty weed. And so those are our kind of main invasive thistles. It's not all of them, but those are the main ones. Friendly reminder to folks, just like the zebra quagga mussels are invasive, but then we also have native mussel and clams. We actually have native thistles in Alberta, and not a lot of folks know that. And so yeah, just a friendly reminder, we do have native thistles, and they look like thistles, right? You can see those species on the right. They look thistly to me, right? And those are actually native species. So yeah, I'll just remind folks we do have native species. So again, take photos, ask an expert, because you could accidentally think you have the prohibited noxious nodding thistle when in fact it might be the native Drummond's thistle, which have very different implications for what you need to do about it. So those are the thistles. Absinthe wormwood, goodness, absinthe wormwood is doing well in a lot of the province. There's that lovely hedge of it there you can see along that walking trail. a very drought-resistant plant. Animals don't particularly like to eat it, which allows it to overtake overgrazed pastures, for example, livestock, and in rangelands that have disturbance. It can set up shop, and then it has that competitive advantage wherein animals don't eat it very much. And so when animals eat the plants around it, that gives it a nice competitive advantage. It's mostly unregulated, except for a few municipalities. And interestingly, I just had someone notify me that a rust fungus I found on one of our Artemisia species in Alberta um, is actually a potential. It's a fungus that can potentially affect absinthe wormwood as well. So I don't know much about it. I was just told that recently. So I'm going to look more into it. But if there's some way that I could get it to spread from the native Artemisia to our absinthe wormwood, I would love to have some biocontrol assistance. So we'll see. I was more looking into it to do. I don't know much about it yet. That's absinthe wormwood. Sicer milkvetch. I love this photo here of this landscape. This is in Medicine Hat. This was, I want to say, August. And it was just a great example of, our grasslands are so well adapted to low moisture. And so they're really good at, going to sleep for the season, right? They go dormant when it gets too dry and they turn that color. Meanwhile, these giant lush mats of Sicer milkvetch are just absolutely bulldozing their way through some of our native grasslands. It's an important forage species. It's good for livestock, and farmers often quite like it. It's not so welcome in our natural areas, and you can see why in that photo. It's pretty shocking how expansive it can get. Kochia and Russian thistle, these are our main tumbleweedy weeds. So these plants can both break off at the base and get blown by the wind to disperse very large amounts of seeds. So kochia, major agricultural weed, very drought, heat, and salt tolerant. So it's got a phenomenal physiology triple threat occurring there. And especially when southern Alberta has really dry years and there's a lot of crop failure, that's where kochia can actually do okay while the crops completely die off. And so that can really outcompete the remaining crop you have, and that can contaminate the seed as well when farmers take that seed off the land. So that really reduces the value of it. So kochia is doing great. Um, and I expect with climate change, given its hot and dry tolerance, that it'll probably continue to do just fine. Same with the Russian thistle on the right. Technically, we have two different species in that genus in Alberta. They're hard to tell apart, but I'll keep calling it Russian thistle for now. Russian thistle is much pokier than kochia. Kochia is not pokey, but Russian thistle sure is. Neither species is regulated under the Weed Control Act at this time, though I think there are some municipalities that regulate kochia itself. So yeah, those species do pose some challenges, especially where there is disturbance. You can see this is Medicine Hat in the rightmost photo, where walking and biking trails have really been overrun with kochia and absinthe worm. Kochia and Russian thistle. And look at that amazing Russian thistle on my head, right? That I'm wearing as a hat. Those invasive, prickly, tumbling bushes can get incredibly large. So it's a really cool plant. But yeah, pretty horrifying what it can do. Baby's breath. Some folks have made comments that it's like, oh, we don't actually see that much baby's breath. It's not that huge of a problem. Boy, folks, if you could spend some time in the Pekauke Dunes, which if you're saying, where's that? In the middle of nowhere. But the Pekauke Dunes are a really cool special ecosystem. What is that? I guess like southwest of Medicine Hat. That's where some of our federally listed species at risk are. So things like we have smooth goosefoot and western spiderwort. Those are our federally protected species that grow in those sand dunes. And the baby's breath really, really likes that habitat and area too. So it's a pretty specific and direct threat, both to the rangeland health, right in that photo on the left, that is for the most part native prairie in that area. That's agricultural public land. And baby's breath doing a really good job of displacing native vegetation and reducing the forage value for livestock in that area, in that native prairie, but also posing a direct threat to those vulnerable species in the dunes. Fortunately, Alberta Environment has a pretty cool individual who is overseeing that area, and she's made some great success in pushing back the baby's breath, but with a significant amount of sustained effort. So I really admire the work she's done. And yeah, don't underestimate baby's breath is what I would leave you with that. Leafy spurge. Anyone who's gone on a walk along rivers in Alberta probably knows leafy spurge. This is a park in Edmonton, a dog park on the left, with just an amazing ocean of leafy spurge. It forms these amazing rhizomatous colonies, very toxic. It has these weird yellow and green umbrella-shaped flower clusters. It's just a real funky plant. It has white sap, which is very toxic, and it tastes very bitter. How do I know that? Yeah, I put it in my mouth. I do not recommend other folks doing that. Not wise by any means. It's not the first toxic plant I put in my mouth, but again, I don't recommend that for the average person. So yeah, leafy spurge really well suited to riparian areas, really drought resistant. The seeds also explode, kind of like the Himalayan balsam, so they can travel large distances. And again, yeah, can form amazing, massive monocultures that kill off biodiversity, and of course pose that threat to livestock due to their toxicity. Yeah, I know I'm running long here, so I'll try to wrap this up. No shortage of knapweeds, right? If anyone has spent time in Waterton, for example, the Blackiston alluvial fan has an absolutely incredible abundance of the spotted knapweed. So it's a pretty tough situation knapweed wise. Um, Goosefoot, we have lamb's quarters on the right, very common agricultural weed. Fun story on the left, we actually seem to have a new species of goosefoot to Alberta. I learned it as Chenopodium bataceum, but it looks like there was already a species name change. I don't even know what it is anymore, sorry. But yeah, there's we have lots of the invasive lamb's quarters, but there's also many native goosefoot species as well, and they are hard to tell apart. So yeah, ask an expert for sure if you're not sure, because lots of them look very similar. But yeah, I seem to have discovered a new species to Alberta with the striped goosefoot in Drumheller. Invasive grasses. Please, got to be wrapping up here. So we have downy brome, Bromus tectorum. This is an invasive annual grass. This is Milk River. If folks might recognize the rock formations in the background. Downy brome is often called cheat grass, and that's because it is referred to cheating livestock out of calories. It's a very nutrient poor plant and can form large patches as well. So yeah, very negative impact on wildlife and livestock that consume it. And then, okay, this has got to be the end here, I think. These are two invasive annual grasses, not yet present in Alberta, but they are in Montana. And so just on Friday, I believe, the province published the new prohibited and noxious species list for the Weed Control Act. So there's a brand new, fresh list, and both of these grasses did make it onto the list. So Medusa head and bentonata, yeah, highly invasive annual grasses, big problem in Montana, and we're worried about these coming to Alberta. So pretty scary. Oh my goodness. Okay. One last one. Salt lover. This is a new detection last year. Dr. Matthias Buck, I believe from the Royal Alberta Museum, detected this species down along the South Saskatchewan River in a somewhat remote area. And that marks a first for this prohibited noxious weed in Canada. So that's really unfortunate, and it grows in very challenging to control eroding clay slopes near the river. So just yeah, essentially impossible to deal with, but I wish the folks down there the best of luck in trying to manage it. Very drought resistant, as you can probably tell from these photos. It's very succulent, and that's a kind of dry, gravelly, and clay habitat that it likes to thrive in. So, okay, I'm wrapping this up. Thank you, everyone, for listening. It has gone very long, but I really appreciate it. And again, open invitation. Please send me pictures of plants and shells in Alberta. I'm open to it. Yeah, so please text or email me pictures. And if you are interested in community nature walks, rare plant surveys, seminars like this, I can talk a ton about native species as well. Things like that. I'm happy to talk about those opportunities. So thank you everyone for listening, and I'm happy to take questions.
Thank you, Callum. There are a few questions in the chat. Do you want to address them? So the first one is someone asked if water lilies are invasive.
Good question. Water lilies. So I would answer that question with a question, which is which one? So we do have a very common yellow pond lily. Water lily is often a broadly applied term. It refers to the entire Nymphaceae family. So it's a very large family of plants. So the very common yellow one, it's mostly in the parkland and boreal, maybe a bit into the foothills as well. And that's very common. That is native. And then we do have two rare white ones as well, but those are pretty, excuse me, remote, boreal and into the far northeast. That said, there are introduced garden variety water lilies in a stormwater pond in Lethbridge. I don't fully know how they got there, but somehow someone planted non-native water lilies in that pond. My understanding is that most of the garden variety water lilies are actually sterile, though, and have to be planted by rhizome. So they're probably not. It would be pretty tough for them to spread, right? Just because they don't have seeds to wash away or float away. So um, yeah, do not plant a garden variety water lily in a water body in Alberta.
And I think you addressed the question about biocontrols already, but someone else asked, can AI help to locate these invasive species?
Good question. So I'll go directly to iNaturalist, for example. iNaturalist does employ an AI CompuVision tool that helps identify organisms based on geography-based reverse image search. So it's a typical image search kind of engine, but it specifically compares it to the most likely species to occur in the area around you, and so that really helps refine the possibilities in the suggestions that it gives. So that's a really good and useful tool that's already employing that kind of search mechanism. So yeah, I would say iNaturalist is already doing that to a very effective degree. Not perfect, but probably the best we've ever had for identifying organisms for a layperson in human history. So pretty cool tool.
And then Liz asked about the fish. So the comment about, you catch an invasive fish and then you kill it. So then she asked, what happens to the invasive fish? Is it made into fertilizer or something useful?
Yeah, good question. So if you individually catch it and kill it, as long as it's dead, you can do what you want with it. You technically can eat goldfish and Prussian carp. They tend to be pretty small, so it doesn't tend to be that effective. But there are traditions in China and Eastern Europe who do like it is from their cultural culinary traditions to consume carp species. So if you're interested in it and have a taste for it, that could be a way to use it. Some people do mix it into their compost. Unfortunately, with the stormwater pond treatments, when they use the pesticide, I believe it is a label requirement on the pesticide that those fish go to a landfill. So at this time, no, they're not being converted. The fish from those treatments are not being converted into fertilizer or anything. But that's because of a legal requirement, not a biological requirement at this time. That's my understanding.
Thanks. And then the last question, do you know any way to control creeping bellflower in Calgary?
Let
Great
me guess,
question.
you have a single detached family home with a neighbor who planted it in their garden and now it's spread under the fence into your. Yeah. So that's the story in pretty much every urban setting with creeping bellflower. It spreads into your lawn, it gets into your flower bed. I will be honest, I would far rather battle Himalayan balsam in my waders in a wetland than creeping bellflower in my garden. I grew it in my garden for years. No, I did not win against it until ultimately my sister converted that area to lawn later and laid down sod on top of it. So I wish I had good solutions for you. Creeping bellflower is just hard. It's just a hard battle. It's hard to a hard plant to defeat, and especially in gardens, people don't want to apply herbicide to it. I understand and respect that in those contexts. So it's just hard. If I had a good easy answer, I would tell you, but I think there just isn't one. It's just a hard battle.
I agree. We have it here at AWA as well.
Yeah.
Um, okay, so that's all I have, Callum, for questions at the moment. I just want to thank you very much. I really enjoyed the discussion that you gave us, the presentation you gave us at the BioBlitz in Cypress Hills, and um, I'm so pleased that you came tonight to give this, and I think everyone really enjoyed it. Um, For anyone who's interested, we do have another talk next week. It's Understory. It's a talk night with Kevin Van Tighem about his book. And there will also be an art exhibit with Neil Cattle on the same night, so February 17th. Otherwise, check out our website events page. There's lots of events coming up, and lots of our adventure hikes will be also coming up shortly. You'll see them getting posted soon. So thank you very much. I really appreciate it, and have a good evening, everybody.
Thank you, everyone. I appreciate it.